Is Ohio set to get more Republican-friendly maps? Today on Political Access, we're going to recap the Ohio redistricting story and take a look at what might be ahead for the map-making process. So let's get right into this one. And here's a story that has some background about the redistricting process. It is confusing and a little bit convoluted, but my basic simple understanding is there was a redistricting commission that was supposed to be set up that was passed by a statewide referendum. The Republican legislator drew favorable maps for themselves. They were challenged many times in the courts. They were struck down and they were redrawn, and the same thing kind of ended up happening, both with the state legislator as well as the congressional maps. And the key thing here is the Ohio Supreme Court. There's 7 justices. Technically, there are 4 conservative or Republican justices, but one of them did keep siding with the Democrat or liberal bloc of the court, and that meant the maps kept getting struck down, even though it was supposed to be a conservative majority. But now, since the midterms, Republicans won the Supreme Court seats in Ohio, and a conservative judge that was the swing vote that sided with striking down the maps, she reached age 70. She's got to step down, so there will be an appointment from Governor Mike DeWine to fill that seat. And we now know who that appointee will be, and it will be Joe Deters. This page here talks about Joe Deters, goes into his background, etc. He is 65, so he's already approaching that mandatory retirement age, and he previously served as the treasurer of Ohio from 1999 to 2005. But probably the most significant thing here is he does appear to be family friends with Governor Mike DeWine, so I don't think most people are going to be a fan of that. So that kind of reeks of a form of nepotism, even though he's not related to Mike DeWine. But I do think voters are a little bit tired of those inside connections that lead to political favoritism. But anyway, with this appointment, a little bit into the new year, there will be a new conservative majority on the court. So that might mean that the Republicans will get a much more favorable map. Now, before we get into what that might look like, here on Ballotpedia, here is another great summary of the entire redistricting process for Ohio. Again, it's confusing, but this does try to sum it up for you. I also did review the Ohio Congressional map when I was reviewing all the redistricting maps last year, so be sure to look at that video if you'd like. But this is a great summary here on Ballotpedia, and I do hear that there's new movements to have additional referendums for independent commissions to redraw the maps. So we'll see what happens with that. And I know the State House and State Senate, that's a separate issue, and I'm sure it's important, but I want to focus on the bigger picture, and that's the congressional maps. So let's see what happened here in the midterms. Well, there are 15 congressional districts. Republicans won 10 of them. Democrats won 5. And Democrats actually did have a reasonable night here in Ohio, even though the state has trended toward the right. Now, in the popular vote, Republicans statewide got 56.4% in the U.S. House, and Democrats got 43.6%. So that means Republicans will control 2/3 of the seats, 66.7%, Democrats 1/3, 33.3%. Now, it all depends on how you want to define what a fair map is. I generally like to take the statewide popular vote for the U.S. House and correlate that with the number of seats a party should hold. I understand it's not going to be perfect, and if that correlated perfectly, Republicans would have 8.5 seats, Democrats 6.5. Obviously, you cannot win half of a seat. So even if we give that the benefit of the doubt to the Republicans, that would be 9-6. That's still a map that does favor the Republicans if you go by the statewide popular vote. Now, the statewide popular vote is important, but it's not everything 100% of the time. But let's switch over to 538 where we can get a nice look at this map. So you can hover over any of these districts. It will show you the partisan lean. Most of them are overwhelmingly Republican, but some of them are only mildly Republican. And those marginal seats are the ones Democrats had success in. And those are exactly the ones I think Republicans are going to want to strengthen when they redraw this map. For example, here in Ohio's 9th, this is an R+6, but longtime Democrat Marcy Kaptur, she won this thing, and it wasn't even really all that close. But there were some issues with the Republican candidate in the midterms, and Marcy Kaptur is very well known. Republicans could probably easily flip the seat if they had a less controversial candidate or once Marcy Kaptur retires. But even having said that, they should still have been able to flip this seat in 2022. The same thing kind of happened here to a lesser extent in Ohio's 13th. That's almost an even partisan lean, but Republicans still should have been able to win that seat. And down here in Ohio's 1st, This is actually a D+3 district, but the Republican incumbent there was expected to hold on. He ended up losing. So this is another seat Republicans are going to want to mildly tweak so they can carry these next time. If you go all the way down here, this does break down the districts a little bit more, but all the way at the bottom, it does show some other maps that were proposed, and some of them were by Democrats. And all of the maps basically are going to favor the Republicans. There's no question about that. It's a red-leaning state. Republicans did control the process, even though there was an independent commission. Plus, the other key thing favoring the Republicans is the geography. Now let's go a little bit farther into this and switch over to Dave's redistricting so we can take a look at the partisan lean of each precinct. Now here's where you can get a good idea of how this state votes. There's a lot of red here, and that is dark red throughout most of Ohio. But there are some patches of dark blue. Now each congressional district in Ohio is going to hold about 786,000 people. The largest city as well as the capital is Columbus. That is located here, and that has just over 900,000 people. So that can either fit perfectly into its own district, and it would of course be a very deep blue district, and that would favor the Republicans. Now, the Democrats, if they could do whatever they want, they might want to try to split that vote right down the middle and try to drown out some of the surrounding lighter red Republican vote, and then they could capture 2 districts. So that is a dilemma, I think, that comes up with redistricting. Do you pack everyone into one district because it would all fit and there would be a little bit extra, and you'd mostly be keeping together communities of interest, and then that remaining vote, which would be a little over 100,000 people, they would be drowned out by that surrounding red Republican vote? Or do you split the vote down the middle, and Democrats would have a shot at 2 districts, but then a lot of Republicans, they're going to be upset about that being lumped in and having their voice drowned out by that deep blue city of Columbus? It's a reasonable debate to have, and there's no easy answers in that kind of scenario. Now, the other city to take a look at here in the Southwest, this is Cincinnati. The population is just over 300,000. And you can see this congressional district here. That's the first district. That's the one the Democrats were able to flip. The boundaries of this district does actually crack a lot of that Cincinnati blue vote, and then it reaches up into the northeast to grab a big portion of that deep red vote to try to drown out that blue vote. The result was a D+3 district according to 538, but there's no question this is a terribly drawn district to try to favor the Republicans. But the problem is it doesn't overwhelmingly favor them. It actually still slightly favors the Democrats. But I've never been a fan of this district. It's clearly unfair. I think the reality is there would just be a mild to moderate Democratic-leaning district if you had Cincinnati in its own district. Now again, you sort of run into the same problem as Columbus. There's just not enough people there to have its own district, so you would have to bring in a lot of that surrounding suburban vote. Some of that does lean Democratic. Then you might also have to bring in some of that rural vote. And of course, those voters are going to skew hard toward the right, and it's a delicate balancing act. There's not always easy answers. Let's go up to another city here, and that is Cleveland. Now that has over 360,000 people in it, and there's also other suburbs outside of Cleveland. It's a blue area. There's no disputing that. And pretty much all that vote is actually located in one district, the 11th. Now outside of Cleveland, there are some patches of blue. And we're talking about cities like Akron and Youngstown. A lot of these used to be blue-leaning areas, and they've largely swung toward the right over the past decade. So Republicans did some weird map making. As you can see, some of the blue vote is cracked to try to dilute it and split it up and give the GOP an advantage in more of these districts. It paid off a little bit, but at the same time, Democrats were able to have a little bit of success. The last thing I'll point out here is the 9th District. Again, that is the district Marcy Captor won. It had an R+6 on 538. That has the city of Toledo in it. Now that population is over 260,000. As you can see, that's pretty much all there is to the blue vote in this entire 9th district. There are some lighter red areas, but for the most part, there's a lot of Republican vote outside of Toledo. So it is technically a more Republican-leaning district, but there was enough crossover voting to vote for the Democrat there. But in a different kind of year, different candidates, the Republican very well could have won that seat. But I think my point here is on the Ohio map. It is actually hard to draw a lot of districts that favor the Democrats. Even in the recent midterms, Republicans still came out a little bit ahead. But there's only one blue city here that has enough population in it to have its own congressional district, that is Columbus. And then there's several other cities that do have a few 100,000 people in them, but they're separated by a lot of Republican vote. So in order to help the Democrats, you would have to do some gerrymandering to connect these patches of blue, and that would be a problem in another direction. Now, it doesn't mean you can't tweak this map and have more competitive districts, because that could be done. But I really don't think there's going to be a scenario where the Democrats get a great map out of this. The geography in other states definitely helps them out more. But in Ohio, I think even if the Democrats controlled the entire process, I don't think they get a whole lot more out of this. Even if we look back on some of those maps on 538 that were actually proposed by Democrats, even those were still pretty good for the Republicans. So it is hard to say what a true fair map would look like in Ohio. Going by the statewide popular vote for the House, that partisan reflection does favor the Republicans by a seat and a half. So if there were at-large congressional districts, I think that's what would happen. Republicans would end up with one seat less. But considering this geography, it is tough. I know Democrats want more out of Ohio. I know they feel good after those midterms. But there's a lot of nuance that goes into making a fair map. And this happens in a lot of different states. A lot of people don't really look at it, though, to see how easy or hard it would be to draw a fair map. There's all kinds of cracking and all kinds of packing in districts all over the U.S. I've reviewed every map on this channel. Some of them are quite egregious. And when it comes to Ohio, it looks like the Republicans are going to redraw the map. And now I think you can have a little bit better idea of what they're going to have to do if they want to make this map more favorable for them. It will be challenged, but assuming it stands, Republicans could probably flip 2 more seats in Ohio. It's probably not going to be pretty, but I will take a look at it if and when it happens. And that is a recap of redistricting in Ohio. So let me know in the comments, what do you think about the Ohio congressional maps? What would a fair map look like to you? And what do you think the Republicans are going to do to strengthen the map in their favor? Let me know down below. And on your way out, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.